Zambia's anti-graft agency has arrested and charged the country's Auditor General, Dick Sichembe, accusing him of engaging in corrupt practices involving more than 1.1 million kwacha, around $54,475. Now, the charges filed against him include obtaining goods under pretenses, conspiring to defraud the government, and theft. The arrest of this top official comes at a time that Zambia is having talks with international creditors regarding its loans. The country plans to rework $12.8 billion of external loans under the G20 Common Framework after it became the first of the continent's pandemic-era sovereign defaults in November 2020. Now joining me from Lusaka is Trevor Habai, financial analyst and senior managing partner, Development Finance Associates. Trevor, welcome again to Business Edge. Thank you for joining me.
Thank you very much. Always good to be here.
Thanks. So in terms of the background of these charges, can you quickly just take us through that? Where did the charges against the Auditor General come from?
So the actual charges that he is facing are from work that he did while in the previous government. Right now, the country has got a new government that came into office in August 2021. And the charges that he is facing are actions that he took while he was in office with the previous government, which was a Patriotic Front. One of the challenges that we had with the Patriotic Front was obviously those gross misconduct in terms of financial management, overpricing of contracts, and abuse of office in terms of access to the country's treasury. And it was during this time that these charges are actually stemming from. But he carried over his position into the new government, and the new government now has obviously charged him with these offenses.
So interestingly enough, he was in this position, as you said, his work from the previous administration. Were there no suspicions, no issues raised before the current administration decided to keep him on in this same position?
So unfortunately, there are a lot of current high-ranking civil servants who are the technocrats who have got a lot of gray areas around how they manage the affairs of the country in the previous administration. But there are a number of them whose positions were obviously terminated, but there's still a very good number whose contracts were carried over into the new administration. And these ones obviously is that they will face a challenge around having to get past the issues that were affecting the previous administration.
So he is one individual, we can accept that. But given the circumstances and the timing, do you expect that this could have any impact, even minimal, maybe even a minor raised eyebrow around Zambia's attempts to talk with international creditors at this time?
So in principle, I actually see this as a positive, that the country is actually willing to take the hard decisions of having to be able to have to arrest an official who is in office if they think that he has actually misconducted himself from the previous administration. But I also think that this should apply to the officers who are in the current administration if they do actually abrogate the law in having to access national treasury. And this is, I think, a positive because it speaks to governance and an issue of the country actually carrying forward its fight around corruption in the country. So I don't think that it's negative. I think it's actually positive in terms of the position that the country is pushing around trying to secure a debt restructuring with the IMF for the country's external debt.
Okay, makes sense. So let's look at the IMF report. So there was an IMF report on Zambia, which said that enormous financial resources that were invested in infrastructure projects, such as road construction, provided avenues for corruption, especially in the award of tenders, where political connections allowed members of the elite to bend the rules and access lucrative contracts. But it would also seem that the Auditor General's arrest sort of confirms that. But then when you look at the fact that this is stemming from a situation in which he was working under the previous administration, there is that separation in the sand. So when you sort of separate the previous administration from that of Hakainde Hichilema's now, do you think that this current administration is getting a handle on corruption, or does corruption continue to run deeply in Zambia?
So corruption is a very difficult situation to deal with on the African continent. We've had this for a couple of generations. The current administration has obviously put its mandate on the fact that they want to be able to eradicate corruption within the government structure. But you'll appreciate that the government structure constitutes more than 100,000 employees who have been running these systems, and they try and work these systems for their personal benefit in terms of corruption. This is very difficult to change when you're just changing a number of top administrators who are the cabinet ministers or the chief executive officers that run the administrations, which is between 30 and 40. And then you have...
All right, it seems like we're having some technical disruptions with our guest joining us from Zambia. And of course, the conversation they're looking at the Auditor General, who has been charged with issues of graft stemming from his previous stint under the previous administration of Edgar Lungu. Trevor, I believe you're back with me. Do I have you back with me now?
Yes, I am back.
Fantastic. So you were talking about the issue of corruption. Of course, we know it's not just a Zambian problem, it's an African problem. But is there a line in the sand that separates the previous administration from this one?
So initially, yes, when they did start coming to office in August 2021, there seems to be a very clear line about what they're wanting to do in terms of corruption, abuse of office, overpricing of contracts, and misuse of government resources for personal gain. We are yet to see the validity of this in terms of the long term. In the short term, obviously, we expect that the people that were previously in the previous government that conducted misconduct or actually got personal gains from countries' resources should be brought to book, and to ensure that this is not continuing to happen. And we are waiting to see what is going to happen within the long term of the new administration that has got another 4 years in office.
And that really takes us to my final question, which was going to ask about the current president who vowed when he took office to show zero tolerance for graft. So you're saying that, in a way, Zambians are still waiting for him to keep his promise and to live up to it. Do you think he'll be able to? He still has a few years left, and I'm very sure most likely he'll attempt to run again, Double H, as many of you call him there. But do you think he will be able to fulfill his promises as zero tolerance for graft and corruption issues in Zambia?
It will be a very, very difficult challenge that you'll be facing because, unfortunately, the corruption now will also be embedded within his own people that has come into the office because they're looking to be able to get personal gains, which is one of the challenges on the African continent, that we've got political leaders who come into office for the sole purpose of having to get personal gains and amass wealth in those offices. And we see this trend right across the continent where the political leaders come into office and within a number of years they have started to amass wealth in terms of property, in terms of accounts, offshore accounts, and in terms of the luxury that they have for their family and relatives. And this is an issue that he will have to deal with within his own administration as well. Otherwise, it's just a perpetuation of what we've always had, which is going to be carried forward. The only difference is that at what level is it going to be?
At what level? All right. He still has probably a few years to make good on his promise and to also show that there is the possibility of having an administration that doesn't become mired in issues of graft and corruption. Trevor, we'll leave it at that. We know the Auditor General has been charged. What do we expect as the next steps? Any court dates? Has he entered a plea at this state and point? What do we know?
So I think he has entered a plea. Obviously, he has entered a plea of not guilty. And in essence, there'll be administrative issues that will come into play, whether there'll be considerations that he will have to go on suspension or on leave while this matter is still pending, or technically speaking is that they could still relinquish him of his position because of the allegations that he has had, and the president will appoint another Auditor General. And I think that is the more likely thing that is going to happen, because the court cases usually take a very long time. And it would not be prudent to try and wait for this to happen. But I reckon this is the direction that the case will go.
All right, Trevor, we'll be following closely and be talking to you to keep in touch with it. Thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you very much. Always a pleasure.
All right.